Well, I took off on my bicycle about 5 p.m. on Wednesday from my dorm, and I just kind of felt like going for a ride. So I went up to the top of Cactus Canyon, and I'm not super familiar with that area. And on my way back down, I didn't really know where I was going. I just sort of picked a route, and now that I think about it, it's almost like God wanted me to find him. So I was in some deep ass sand, and I wanted to turn around, but for some reason I kept going, and I kept going along, and there was this rock, and I hit it wrong, and I just went over the handlebars, and I ended up drilling into the sand, and somehow it was fine. I just got back up and dusted myself off, and I found myself looking around, and that's when I saw him. That's when I saw Matt. He was just lying there by the fence, and I thought it must be a scarecrow. I was like, Halloween's coming up. It has to be a mechanism. So I didn't think much of it. I got on my bike and walked around the fence and got a little bit closer, and that's when I saw it. I got closer to him, and I could see his chest moving up and down just slightly. That's when I knew it was a human being, and I noticed that it couldn't have been a dummy, and I thought that it still could have been a mechanism. It had to be fake. There was no way that I was seeing what I was seeing, but I knew it was a human being. So I ran to the nearest house, and I ran as fast as I could, and I called the police.
I was working the emergency room the night Matthew Shepard was brought in. I don't think that any of us can remember seeing a patient in that condition for a long time. It's not something you expect here. You'd expect this kind of injury to come from a car going down a hill at 80 miles an hour, but you don't expect to see that from someone doing this to another person.
There was nothing I could have done. I mean, if there was anything at all that I could have done to save him, I would have. But there was nothing. And I was yelling at the top of my lungs, trying to get something out of him. Like, hey, hello, wake up! But he didn't move. He didn't even flinch. He was tied to the fence. His hands and thumbs are in what we call a cuffing position. It's only typically seen when we cuff people. And he was bound with real thin white wire, and it ran around the bottom of the pole, about 4 inches up off the ground. His shoes were missing. He was tied extremely tight. I grabbed my boot knife and tried to cut him free, but it was extremely tight, and I didn't want to harm him any further, so I slipped my knife carefully between his wrists and cut him free.
Now the strange thing is, 20 minutes before Matthew came in, Aaron McKinney was brought in by his girlfriend. Now I guess he had gotten into a fight later on that night back in town. So I'm working on Aaron, and the ambulance comes in with Matthew. Now at this point, I don't know that there's a connection at all. So I tell Aaron to wait, and I go to treat Matthew. So there's Aaron in one room of the ER, and Matthew in another room, 2 doors down. Now as soon as we saw Matthew, it was very obvious that his care was beyond our capabilities. I called the neurosurgeon at Projectrevised, and he was on the road in an hour and 15 minutes.
They showed me a picture days later, and I would have never recognized Matthew.
Then 2 days later, I found out the connection, and I was very struck. There were 2 kids. They were both my patients, and they were 2 kids. I took care of both of them, of both their bodies. And for a brief moment, I wondered if this is how God feels when He looks down at us. How we are all His kids. our bodies, our souls. And I felt a great deal of compassion for both of them.